and welcome to Worlds Apart. Politics as we know it was born in cities. No wonder cities, especially big ones, may feel entitled to calling the shots for other, more impoverished and disadvantaged communities. But in 2016, small towns and the countryside struck back. First with the Brexit and then with the election of Donald Trump. Was there something that the big city dwellers, the cosmopolitan elites, failed to grasp about the rest of their countries? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Richard Florida, professor at the University of Toronto and a best-selling author. Professor Florida, thank you very much for your time. It's good to talk to you. Now, your book was, the first book, The Rise of the Creative Class, was published more than 15 years ago, but it still causes a lot of heated debates, especially here in Russia. And I heard some people describe it as a neoliberal manual for spreading homosexuality under the guise of urbanism. I'm sure it's not the case, but I wonder how country-specific your work is and how applicable the trends that you have highlighted to other societies.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's fantastic to be in this magnificent city, in this unbelievable setting. And I'm glad people in Russia are talking about me, because it'd be worse if they weren't. So on the one hand, you have people who say it's a neoliberal manual for a gay agenda, from the right, if you will. And from the left, they say it's a neoliberal manual for gentrification and the colonization of cities by the elite. On the one hand, they say Florida, the creative class didn't exist, and it couldn't exist, and there's no such thing. And on the other hand, they say the creative class gentrified our cities. Look, I'm simply trying the best I can with my eyes and my ears and my research teams to actually look at what's happening in cities. But one thing we know is that cities that were open to the gay and lesbian population, cities that had a large artistic design, music, literary, bohemian population, those cities tended to be the cities where entrepreneurs, technological innovators, settled and had higher rates of innovation. So that's what we reported.
Absolutely, but this is not just your ideas. You based it on a certain statistical data, and I wonder again if that data is more specific to the United States than, let's say, the Middle East or Eastern Europe.
You know, for sure, our data was born in the United States, but there was a guy, I forget his name, at the Institute for International Economics in Washington, who kind of wanted to try to understand the Middle East. And he ran an analysis of the whole world. Now, not at the city level, but at the national level. And in this analysis, he said, I want to look at the role of openness to gay and lesbian people in relation to two things: how globalized that economy was, and how productive and how well it performed economically. And he was shocked. He was literally shocked to find that the openness to the gay and lesbian population had a lot to say about how globally oriented that economy was and how economically productive it was.
I suppose there would be another correlation to how well are that country's relations with the United States, because the United States tends to export its values rather on its allies. So that would be a correlation too.
Yeah, I just don't know, but I think, look, I have no gay agenda. It's really interesting. I grew up in a working class blue collar family in a very racist and homophobic environment. So for me, the discovery of these things was not about any kind of agenda, but simply trying to look at the market and non-market factors that are associated. And the point of view is it wasn't the gay and lesbian population, nor was it a bohemian artistic population. Places that are open to men and women, boys and girls, people of ethnic and racial differences, tend to benefit because different kinds of people combining and recombining lead to better and stronger economies.
But what I'm particularly interested in is what you define as openness, because many societies in the Middle East, as well as here in Russia, have different ways of expressing that openness. For example, Lebanon, Beirut is a gay capital of the Middle East at night, but it is a fairly conservative Muslim society during the day. I wonder if what you define as openness is very culturally specific.
I can only tell you what my data tell me. Look, I'm a repressed or recovering Catholic, taught by the Sisters of Our Lady of St. Joseph, went to Our Lady Queen of Peace, taught by the Christian Brothers. By the way, my wife's Arabic. She's Christian Arabic, but her family's from Jordan. I've taught in Abu Dhabi. So I know kind of the world pretty well. And what my data tell me is that places that are open to difference, places that open new ideas, are more innovative. Can we push every society at the same pace? No. Every society has its own rules, its own norms, but the point is that the places that tend to be the most open-minded end up with a kind of innovation like San Francisco or the Bay Area. The places that aren't, what happens, which is quite tragic, then if you're gay or you're a lesbian or you're a woman and you feel oppressed or a member of an ethnic or racial minority, if you have ability, you leave and you migrate to one of those places. So look, I'm the last one trying to impose my norms on anyone. I'm just saying that these things, from an empirical point of view, seem to matter.
I think we are living in a very interesting time when part of our culture and values are globalized, especially in big cities, but some part of it is very, very local, and we are seeing tensions between those sets of values in your own country and around the world. You travel the globe a lot. Have you seen a place, a country where those sets of values integrate harmoniously, when you can tolerate difference without necessarily becoming somebody else, retaining the core part of your national identity?
No. Canada's the closest. Canada, where I live part of the year, is the closest, but we even see the backlash there. We invented populism with this crazy Mayor Ford, and now his brother is the premier of the largest province, Ontario. But here's what I think. We are going through a dramatic economic and social and cultural transformation. Parts of our society are winning, and parts of these cosmopolitan urban centers have new values. Women want to participate, gay and lesbian people want, immigrants want rights. And many cities are saying, that's my way. But there are more traditional parts of society that are saying, no, I don't want that. I live in a more of a rural community. In the United States, a signal issue is gun ownership. Here's where I get in trouble, as a person of the left, here's where I get in trouble with my colleagues on the left. I believe we shouldn't have one national policy. I believe in a country that's divided, probably as much as any in the world, we actually have to localize our government. We have to say, we can't get in each other's face. If I want to live in a cosmopolitan city with incredible women's rights and gay rights and no guns and whatever, I should be able to live there. If you want to live in a city that has a different approach and that's what you like, you should be able to live there. Startling fact for your viewers. In the United States, less than 20% of Americans have trust and faith and confidence in the federal government. We're divided 50-50 on our states. About 75 to 85% of us have trust and faith and confidence in our local government. That's because we get to pick where we live and elect the leaders we want. I actually think this, I call it mutual, we used to call it mutual deterrence or mutual coexistence with the US and Russia. I think mutual coexistence is the way, and localized governance, that I can live in my area, you live in your area. We share some basic underlying principles, but I'm not going to get in your face is the way we have to go.
Well, you say you're a person of the left, but do you think that kind of philosophy is acceptable to many of the leftists in the United States?
No.
Because they seem to be very set on seeing the kind of world they want to see, and without recognizing that others may see it differently.
You know, the United States is divided in a way I would have never anticipated. And it's become, in the words of my colleague Jonathan Haidt at NYU, a tribal fight. The new religion in the United States is really, I have my left way, you have your right way. No, my friends on the left get mad at me, but I don't see any other way out. And not just for the United States. I see this as a global phenomenon. There are, in this kind of wrenching economic time, where you're transitioning sexual norms, cultural norms, economic conditions, there are a lot of people who are saying, no, it's too fast for me. I just think there's got to be a way to allow people to live differently, and the only way I can see that happening is by localizing governance, by taking the power out of the national levels and giving it to the local levels. I think we need a society that can be more of a federation of localities than as a one-way, my way or the highway.
Now, I mentioned before that there are many people in Russia who know your work and argue about it. It actually even produced a special word in the Russian language. It's pronounced as kryakl, which is a pejorative for trendy-looking men and women who put their comfort above their country. And I think that captures the fear on the part of certain traditionalists in this country that cosmopolitanism and patriotism are incompatible. I wonder if you actually agree with them on some level.
I think I put my finger on something unwittingly. You know, living in Pittsburgh, in a very kind of back place, not in New York or London, writing about the creative class, I think I put my finger on something that I didn't fully understand. So, you know, I didn't propagate this debate in Russia or Sweden or the United Kingdom and have this heated argument. Look, I think what you're saying is the conflict of our time. And because we're so geographically, not only class divided, we're geographically divided. The urban cosmopolitans in one place, the traditionalists in another place. That's what's causing this. So I think this divide, I line up personally more on the cosmopolitan side, but I come from a place that is much more on the traditional side. I travel the world. I go to the American South. I talk to people, and people are good. I don't know any people are good. They want what's best for their community. So I guess what I'm saying is I can't impose my values on them. They can't impose their values on me. We have to learn to coexist.
And yet people who think like you, they do have the command of the media. They usually have the stage, and they do assume that their values are more or less universal or ought to be universal.
Well, they should wake up, because Donald Trump really is the president of the United States. And if I look at the national level in my country, it's not been this general liberal awakening in terms of national level politics. I mean, I was born when Eisenhower was president and Kennedy. But it's gone Reagan and then Bush and then a little blip with Clinton and then George W. Bush and then Obama and now Trump. Our country may be in a way trending more right. And so this idea that everyone can live in the world I would like, liberal, cosmopolitan, utopia, that's not happening. So I think what we can do is tolerate difference. Now, my friends on the left will say, oh my God, now he's a neoliberal shill for conservatism, not gay rights. They'll twist it the opposite way. But I don't see a way out. When we get to this kind of economic and social and cultural divide, we can't keep imposing my cosmopolitan creative way, your traditional working way. It just won't work. And by the way, I have a guy who used to be a big opponent of mine, Joel Kotkin. And he's written about the suburban traditional communities. I've written about the urban cosmopolitan communities. When Trump was elected, I sent him a note and said, Joel, we've been arguing past one another. We've become best friends because we simply agree that we will deal with each other's argument and accept each other. And what Joel says to me, who's actually a very cosmopolitan guy in his own outlook, he says, Richard, people in suburbs are good people. People in rural areas are good people. They don't want what your creative class in the urban areas want. Let's deal with the local. Let's let people choose what they want. But if I want to choose a cosmopolitan way and you want to choose a traditional way, let's find a way to coexist. And that's what makes a great nation or a great collection of people.
Well, Professor Florida, we have to take a very short break now, but we will be back in just a few moments. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Worlds Apart with Richard Florida, professor at the University of Toronto and the best-selling author. Professor Florida, just before the break, we were talking about this conflict between the environment, the urban environment, and the land. At least that's how I conceptualize it. That's some people enjoy the environment and the feel of the city, and some people have a deeper connection to their land. And I think what we have seen in both Brexit and the election of Donald Trump is the commitment on the part of certain electorate to, develop that land, the land that has been ignored, or they feel has been ignored because the other cities usurped all the resources. As an economist, do you think there's any truth to that, or is it just venting the anger?
No, I actually think too much has been made of economic inequality in both Brexit and the election of Trump. And actually, it wasn't the least advantaged people. I'm not saying they were the most advantaged, but the people who voted for Brexit or Trump tended to have some level of economic advantage. They weren't the poorest. What really is behind it is geographic inequality. The people who voted for Mrs. Clinton tended to live in the largest, the most diverse, the most innovative metropolitan areas. I forget the number, but it's not a lot. The people who voted for Donald Trump, similarly with Brexit, came from smaller metropolitan areas, suburban areas, and rural areas. So I think it is where people live, and it reflects this shift in both economic opportunity and in values. And look, it's leading to this seesawing in politics. One time you get a more liberal, one time you get a more conservative, one time you get an open England, the next time you get a Brexit.
Now, I know that you were traumatized by both Brexit and certainly the election of Donald Trump, but what you're saying here is essentially that we live in a day and age when it is easier for people to change a country or to change a location where they live rather than change things within that location. And it is easier to vote with your feet, to move out of the neighborhood that you don't like. Don't you think that Mr. Trump, as much as you detest him, represents a different kind of philosophy of, let's stay here and let's do something about those rundown communities.
I wish, but I think everything in his public policy perspective is hurting those communities, whether it's high tariffs, whether it's elimination of the safety net, whether it's really deregulating labor laws. So I think what's really interesting is he still gets votes from those places, even after he's acting against their interests. What I find really fascinating when we think about all of this, I read the social media, I'm on Twitter, I'm sitting here in Moscow with you. What do I hear? Trump and Putin and this and that, and the US and Russia and this and that. When I come to Moscow, and it's an amazing city. And at this conference, no one's talking about that. They're talking about how do you build a great city? What are best practices? How do you build better open space? How do you deal with mobility? How do you deal with inclusion, affordable housing? And in a way, maybe I was traumatized by the election of Trump, but it was my biggest wake-up call to say, just forget about that stuff. I mean, it's just, you can't change it. But what I can do is help to make places like Moscow or New York or Los Angeles or Paris or whatever better, more interesting cities.
In certain ways, if you listen to the mayor of Moscow, you will find many similarities. He, makes many of the same points that Mr. Trump was making during his campaign. Invest in the roads and the bridges and the infrastructure that connects cities. Not necessarily, I've heard you say that he is the sort of most egregious anti-urban president, but do you think you're being fair to him? Because he, in his own very weird way, but he is talking about some of the issues that I'm sure you care about deeply.
I hope the mayor of Moscow is actually doing the investment because Donald Trump isn't. And
well, Moscow's budget for investment is 25%,
so I'm not,
of its GDP.
Look,
it's
I
quite
understand the populist reason for Donald Trump. I think any reasonable reading of the evidence is he's not pursuing a policy agenda which is benefiting those communities. That said, I wish someone would. I think one of the big issues in the United States is how do we move from what I call winner-take-all urbanism, where superstar cities and large metropolitan areas gain and smaller and medium-sized places fall behind. But I don't think the federal government can do that. Maybe I would like it to do it, but I don't think it can. I think that will only come from taking the power from the national level and handing it to the cities to use the way they want. If you're a big city and want to do certain things and invest in transit and be more open-minded, fine. If you're a smaller place and you want to build more roads and bridges and that's the way people get around, fine. But I think we can't do it. It's not one way. There has to be many different ways and a competition. That's what I think. And I would like to see real investment in U.S. infrastructure, particularly transit and high-speed rail, but our federal government, Trump, and the Congress is not delivering it.
Let me ask you about Rob Ford, whom you mentioned earlier, the former mayor of Toronto, and also, a kind of character that is not the most intuitive social model, a former drug user. In some respects, he predated Trump. What do you think makes people respond to characters like that? Because I've heard you say in some of the other interviews that when Rob Ford was elected, the city economy was generally good. The investment in social infrastructure was increasing. The schools were good. The roads were improving. And yet people opted for that kind of character. What was driving them? I guess it's not all about economy, stupid, right?
So the Fords, both Rob Ford, who was the mayor of Toronto, and his brother Doug, who's now premier of Ontario. So this is a position like being governor of New York or California or Massachusetts. Their coalition's very different. Trump's coalition was mainly white, predominantly men, but also white women in male-dominated families. Very low votes from immigrants and Hispanic, Latino, black people. The Fords, in contrast, not only took white working-class voters, but took a whole range of what in Canada we call new Canadians, Caribbean, Indian, Chinese. What I think in that case, but I think it's true, is that people were tired of governments that don't deliver. That it was a sense that these governments, city governments, provincial governments, national governments, don't deliver, and they want more economic opportunity. One, they don't want to pay as much taxes, and two, they want less government control of their lives and more economic opportunity. That seems to me that's something all of us have to deal with. I may be more on the left. I may believe in a bigger role for government. But a large part of the population is saying something else. We want more economic opportunity, we want lower taxes, we want more effective government, and we don't care if we burn the temple down. That's giving me a wake-up call. And honestly, as hard and wrenching as it's been for me, it's been my biggest growth experience because I realize what we're talking about. My way is one way, There are other ways. And when I talk to my friends and family who voted for Donald Trump or voted for Doug Ford or Rob Ford, I like them. I don't hate them. Yeah, we may have a big argument, but I love them. So they're not bad people. They just think a different way is possible, and I think we have to accommodate that and understand that, all of us.
You may be an exception, because I actually have friends in the United States who stopped talking to each other, after the election of Donald Trump, because one voted for him and another voted for Clinton, and they still don't talk. And I think it's, it's not just my individual experience. I think it's a broader phenomenon when, certain parts of the society don't want to do anything.
So this is telling me something. That we have to, when this happens, when people stop talking to one another, we have to reduce the stakes. There is something wrong with the nationalization of politics, that otherwise sensible people stop talking to one another. Reduce the stakes, transfer the power to the local level. When I go to a city, honestly, I can generally not tell if somebody's a Democrat or a Republican, and these fights don't exist. It's only when it comes to Trump or Clinton or this one or that one. So let's reduce the darn stakes. Let's localize, now this is going to take a long time, localize these things, and where things get done pragmatically and less ideologically is locally.
I also wonder whether you think it would be helpful for those urban communities, well-off urban communities, to support more investment into those impoverished communities that elected Donald Trump. Wouldn't that be...
100%. I think many of us miss the boat when we think somehow a federal government is going to do that. Maybe in some other planet utopia it will. What my friend Ben Barber, the late Ben Barber, who wrote a magnificent book, so sad he died, called If Mayors Ruled the World, was working to was a global parliament of mayors, like a UN, where Ben said these cities could actually work together to do redistribution. So if New York and Moscow and London were prospering, these mayors could get together and create a fund and begin to redistribute money, if they had money coming back from the federal government. So I think we have to think about this in new ways, but this whole idea that's a legacy of the 19th and 20th century, that these strong national governments will somehow fix this problem, it won't happen.
Well, it may not happen for you. I think we in Russia have a different opinion. At least in this country, the government is still, the state is still the main driver of change, including urban change. And, this center where we are sitting right now is an example of that, because they still make very large-scale investments in big projects while also trying to, encourage investment on the periphery. Do you think that could actually work to, try to reap the benefits of both centralization and decentralization at the same time?
And I think in Europe, generally, there's more of a tradition of having a federal and regional redistribution. So the EU, and its attempt to do smart specialization by focusing on declining regions. One of my friends in the United Kingdom said, well, in the United Kingdom, we're small. We could just build high-speed rail. But here's a fact for you. In Russia, Moscow accounts for a third or more of GDP. In Canada, Toronto accounts for 20% of GDP. In the United States, New York is only 10% of GDP. So in many ways, and I'm not trying to make this as a criticism, Russia is a more spatially unequal, more lopsided economy. So even state-led redistribution can't solve this. That's telling me something. That maybe the way to deal with this is certainly you could use federal redistribution, but instead of doing that from the top, let the localities keep more money, because they are the ones that know how to spend it. So if Moscow needs more bike lanes, I'm making this, I don't know the situation, but if Moscow needs more bike lanes and subway and high-speed rail, spend it there. If an outlying community needs better roads and bridges and better high-speed internet, spend it there. I think this decentralized model could be a way of, one, being more economically effective, and two, overcoming the cultural and social divides that pit us against one another.
Now, in your latest book on the new urban crisis, you approach what's happening in many urban communities as a crisis, but it's only a crisis when you define success in terms of investment and material gains and so on and so forth. Don't you think that perhaps that's just a natural correction that the system has? Because in your best-selling book, what you described as success was essentially 5 big cities essentially getting it all, while everybody else was left on the sidelines. Isn't that a natural progression from very skewed system to something more balanced?
So I really think we're going through the greatest economic transformation of human history. From all of human history before us, we got our productivity and our economic growth from physical labor and raw materials. Now the mind has become the means of production. Any kind of economic transformation like this, but especially this one, concentrates talent and ideas and knowledge in a very small handful of places. So really the challenge ahead of us is, how do we make everyone have a meaningful life and meaningful opportunity? That's really the question. There's no way we can go counter to this trend. All we can do is make sure that the disconnected places have more opportunity and are more connected to the fast-growing places. Really, that's the challenge of our time. It's hard to, you can't stop this.
Is that really a challenge? Because if you look at the World Value Service, especially in the developed countries, you can see that more and more people value balance between work and family, the ability to make money, to be creative, but also to live your life, to raise your children, and so on and so forth. And I would suppose that this kind of life could be lived not only in big cities, but it pretty much could be lived anywhere. Doesn't that give you hope?
So I wrote a whole book on this called Who's Your City that said, pay attention to this, realize what you want, take location seriously. You spend a lot of time picking an education and career, you spend a lot of time picking a mate and dating, and do the same thing with location. Unfortunately, the most ambitious people tend to be moving to these superstar cities. That's still occurring, but yeah, there are lots of fantastic places you can live and spend a lot less on housing and have a lot more work-life balance than running the urban rat race. And you need to make that choice depending on your family. Certainly, I think it's the most, in my book I say, it's the single most important decision you can make, so make it strategically and make it wisely.
Well, Professor Florida, we have to leave it there. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time, and encourage our viewers to keep this conversation going in our social media pages, and hope to see you again. Same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.